In a recent video, I spent over $200 on this book, what claims to be the most comprehensive atlas in the world. And I compared this to this one, the National Geographic Family Reference Atlas that I've had ever since I was a kid. Long story short, this atlas failed to impress me, while I was pleasantly surprised with how comprehensive this ended up being. What was really unexpected, however, was the email I received the day after releasing that video from one of National Geographic's senior cartographers who explained they'd watched my video and felt that I should have a copy of their latest edition atlas, as well as a copy of their 11th edition World Atlas. This, of course, was an offer I couldn't refuse, and so a week later, these arrived on my doorstep. First, here's the latest version of their Family Reference Atlas, the 5th edition compared to my 3rd edition. But then they also sent me this, their even more comprehensive atlas of the world, which is about the same size as this one. Now, just to be clear, this isn't a sponsored video. National Geographic did not ask me to talk about these or anything. But the truth is, I've loved National Geographic ever since I was a kid. I had their atlases, I ordered their magazines, I even remember begging my mom to pay for the National Geographic channel on TV. This is all to say Nat Geo doesn't need to bribe me into saying good stuff about them, as they've been a core part of my geography education from the very beginning, and the fact that they reached out to me felt like being recognized by a hero of mine. So hell yeah, I accepted these free atlases, and today I finally want to open them up and see what more, if anything, they have to teach me about the world. Okay, now I don't just want to turn this into an appreciation video. I really want to see if I can use these to learn something new. And to do that, I need a way to test these out. If you'll remember, to evaluate these atlases, I came up with a list of 16 locations I've looked at in previous videos to see how well these places were covered. And I sort of just want to repeat this experiment with these to see if they include any more detail than what we've already seen. Is that a good idea that advances the concept even further, or is it still a little too similar to the previous video? Okay, well, how about this? Let's only look at the locations that both of these atlases did not have. That way, we'll truly get to see if these are actually any kind of improvement over these, without reviewing stuff we've already seen before. Starting us off, the first place I looked for was Dogger Bank. If you'll remember, while my first Nat Geo Atlas had some delightful oceanographic maps that illustrated this underwater platform well enough, there was still something left to be desired, as it never actually included the name of Dogger Bank. So I'm curious to see if anything's changed. Opening this atlas up to its oceanographic section will find a similar, if slightly stylistically different map. Based purely on aesthetics, I'll be honest, I kind of prefer the old oceanographic maps here in my 3rd edition, but what it lacks in appearances, this newer edition makes up for in attention to detail, as here in the middle of the North Sea, we will find the name Dogger Bank. Color me impressed already, as this is the first time I've ever actually seen this feature labeled in an atlas. But okay, what about in here, our even bigger book? Can we expect any more from this? Well, sure enough, if we open this up to its oceanographic section, we'll again find Dogger Bank, but now it's also outlined, along with other peaks of this elevated plain, such as the nearby Jutland Bank or Great Fishers Bank, 2 features I wasn't even aware of until just now. Not only is this way more information than was included in this atlas, but I'm already learning about new features, so I'd say we're off to a good start. Overall, it appears Dogger Bank has finally crossed the threshold into mainstream awareness, at least within the geography community, and I can't help but wonder if this channel had anything to do with that. However, the next place I tried to find was Zelandia, which again, neither of these atlases had labeled, and instead both simply gave the names of each specific bank that makes up this sunken landmass. Though looking through either of these atlases, we'll find they did the same exact thing, having each part of the structure labeled Campbell Plateau, Chatham Rise, Lord Howe Rise, but not the overarching structure itself. What I think this shows is this isn't an issue of detail, but recognition, as Zelandia still hasn't quite received the same level of acceptance from the geography community as places like Dogger Bank has, despite it being one of the largest continental fragments on Earth. If I had to guess why Zelandia remains on the fringe, I'd say it's because it's too often been sensationalized as the 8th continent, a claim that's obviously a little ridiculous, which I believe is why cartographers avoid it altogether. However, that doesn't change the fact that Zelandia still is a very real and absolutely massive feature on this planet, and if other underwater landforms like the Mascarene Plateau, the Kerguelen Plateau, or the Ontong Java Plateau are worth labeling, then so is the Zelandia Plateau. While I don't think it's all that useful to consider Zelandia a continent, I do believe understanding this fragment of continental crust and how it came to be on the ocean floor gives us some real insight into the inner workings of this planet, which is why I enjoy talking about it so much, and why I think it's worth including in atlases like this. Though I guess we'll have to wait a little longer to see that happen. After Zelandia, the next place I tried to find was George's Bank off the coast of Massachusetts, which not too long ago formed a sizable island. As recently as the 1800s, parts of this bank still peaked above the surface, so I thought it might be worth mentioning, though neither of these two atlases did. Perhaps that's why I was so thrilled when I turned back to the page on the Atlantic Ocean and found this name right here. In this atlas, we get an even better look at this bank, which has again been outlined, giving us an idea of what shape this sunken land once took. It would appear George's Bank has also only recently entered the cartographer's vocabulary, which is pretty cool. The next place I tried finding was the Salas y Gomez Ridge in the southeastern corner of the Pacific Ocean. If you'll remember, I couldn't find the name of this ridge in this atlas, which really surprised me considering it's nothing more than a typical mid-ocean ridge. But I did find it in here, so I'm pretty sure I'll find it in these as well. Yeah, here it is, the Sala y Gomez Ridge. No surprise here, though I will admit I am impressed by their inclusion of the names of the many individual underwater mountains that make up this ridge, like ichthyologist seamount. That's a level of detail we didn't get in my old version. Another feature this atlas shockingly didn't have labeled was the Saya de Malha Bank in the middle of the Indian Ocean, though again it was labeled here in my old atlas. Checking the later edition of this, we'll find not only the Saya de Malha, but even more of the Mascarene Plateau has been labeled, such as Ritchie Bank up here and Sudan Bank down here. Even more features I wasn't familiar with until now. What's funny about this is if we take another look at this Saya de Malha expedition summary that I made another video about and turn to page 38, they provided us with a map of where exactly this expedition took place. If you look real close, this here is Saya de Malha, and now we know this little chunk here is actually Ritchie Bank. Technically, this whole expedition didn't even take place where it said it did. But because this was the map they were using, no one actually knew this, and it's only on the pages of the most modern atlases that the many individual banks of the Mascarene Plateau have finally been well defined. The final underwater feature I tried to find was the Hudson Canyon off the east coast of North America. Considering this canyon was featured in here, it should come as no surprise that both of these newer editions contain it as well, making this, again, the only atlas not to. However, if you watched my Biggest Canyons video, you may remember learning about another, even greater feature, Zemchug Canyon, the largest underwater canyon anywhere on this planet. Originally, this was the canyon I wanted to look for in these. The only problem was that neither of them actually had it, so I didn't even bother including it in the video, and instead just looked for the Hudson Canyon, a feature at least one of these had. Though now I'm curious if either of these have been updated to include it. Wow, yeah, look, we will find Zimchug Canyon here in the middle of the Bering Sea, but not much else. But then if we look for Zimchug in here, we'll again find it, as well as a number of the surrounding canyons eating into the continental shelf, such as Navarin Canyon, Permanence Canyon, Bering Canyon, and a few more down here, many of which I never found while doing research for that video. By now, I think it's clear I'm really impressed by these. Not only do they contain a lot more of the obscure features I like talking about, but it also feels like they've gone up and above to improve on their previous version and include even more places for us to learn about. However, I did find one example of the opposite happening. You see, after talking about underwater canyons, I used this to transition to talking about features on land by searching for the Yarlung Sangpo Grand Canyon in Tibet, the deepest canyon above the ocean. Unsurprisingly, this atlas failed to include it, but this one really amazed me when it gave the canyon a special label and everything, so I was expecting something similar in these. But shockingly, this canyon that's deeper and longer than the Grand Canyon here in the US has been left out of both of these newer atlases. I mean, sure, the Yarlung Sangpo River may be labeled, but I was specifically hoping to see the canyon get a mention. Though it appears this has been intentionally removed from National Geographic's list of notable canyons, and I can't help but wonder why. But I'll be honest, from here on out, every other location I looked at was pretty much just the same or slightly updated. Neither included Pleistocene Park outside of Chersky, Russia. Both illustrated the pink Lake Natron in East Africa using blue dashed lines. Neither featured the lost Tamanrasset River in West Africa, or the Cinque Forest in Greenland, or the Palos Verdes Hills of California, or the Dobrochikia stream in Slovenia. I don't want to waste your time looking at all these if the outcome is just going to be the same. But there is one last name I want to look for. If you'll remember, the whole reason I bought this atlas was to find a reference to Badwater Crater, the deepest crater on Mars. This atlas turned out to not even have a map of Mars, though this one did, and it even had this crater correctly labeled as Mars's deepest, though it didn't actually include the crater's name. Of course, this makes sense. This atlas was printed 5 years before the name Badwater was even officially adopted, so it's perfectly understandable that this is how they chose to describe it back then. But now that this name has officially been in use for over 8 years, I'm curious to see if National Geographic has updated their Mars map. Flipping all the way to the back, we'll find no, they haven't. The name Badwater Crater is still nowhere to be seen, and instead has the same exact label as before. That's how it's displayed in both of these, telling us Badwater remains a name even the most up-to-date publications are yet to catch up with. But mark my words, now that I'm addressing it, I can almost guarantee the next time Nat Geo puts out an atlas, it'll include the name of this notable crater. Maybe I'll make a video about that when the time comes. For now though, I hope you can see just how much we can learn from opening up new atlases. Not only did I learn a few more features on this planet's surface I didn't know before, but I've also come to understand more about why these places all stood out to me in the first place. When I first started using atlases to learn about the world, none of these places were to be found in books, or at least not the one I had, making them feel truly unknown. This feeling that features like Doggerland or George's Bank or even Badwater Crater were left off of atlases like this is exactly what compelled me to make videos about them, hence the name Atlas Pro. Since then, however, we can see a lot of these places have in fact made their way into the books, even the same exact one I have. Whether or not this channel had anything to do with that is debatable, but what's clear is that cartography, both as a science and an art, is still progressing. We're still exploring this planet and figuring out how it all fits together. And I believe this collection of atlases demonstrates this progression really well. We can literally see the detail getting better over time, to the point where names that I once found inspiring for their obscurity are on their way to becoming common knowledge. And I'm sure by now some of you are getting tired of even hearing about them. That's why the final lesson I'm taking away from these books is that it's time for me to move on from these places and get back to exploring the world through atlases to see what else remains to be included.
It knows no boundaries. It does not discriminate, and it can strike at any time. The power of the elements. Extreme Earth, every Sunday night at 7:30 on National Geographic Channel.